When it comes to high-speed rail, no country comes close to China. Over the past 2 decades, China has built the world's largest network, more than 48,000 kilometers of track. That's over 70% of all high-speed rail lines on the planet, stretching across cities, deserts, and mountains. This massive expansion didn't just change how people travel in China. It made China the global leader in rail technology, the country everyone calls when they want to modernize their transportation systems. From Asia to Africa, and now even parts of Europe, more and more nations are choosing to partner with China. And among these countries, one stands out: Turkey. A few years ago, Turkey reached a preliminary deal worth tens of billions of euros with China to build new high-speed rail lines. Everything seemed set. Negotiations went on for months, both sides exchanged blueprints, and the project was about to move forward. But then, out of nowhere, Turkey rejected China's proposal and handed the project to Germany's Siemens instead. That decision shocked many observers. It seemed Turkey had turned its back on what could have been one of the most advanced rail partnerships in the world. Yet the story didn't end there. Today, after years of delays and technical troubles, Turkey is once again turning to China for help. So what really happened? Why did Turkey walk away from China back then? And what's driving it back now? And perhaps the biggest question of all, will China be willing to help this time? Stay tuned, because in this video, we're going to uncover the entire story, from broken deals and political twists to a new vision that could reshape trade across Eurasia. To understand why Turkey keeps chasing high-speed rail dreams, we need to look at the bigger picture: how central railways are to Turkey's vision of modernization. For decades, Turkey's railway system has struggled with old infrastructure, slow trains, and uneven electrification. Many lines still rely on outdated systems inherited from decades ago. Traveling across the country was not only slow, but also inefficient for both passengers and goods. That began to change in 2014, when Turkey opened its first high-speed rail line between Ankara and Istanbul. This project was a national milestone. It reduced what used to be a 4-hour and 20-minute journey to just about 80 minutes. For the first time, high-speed travel wasn't just something people saw in other countries. It became a proud symbol of Turkey's progress. But, success in one corridor wasn't enough. Looking across the rest of the country, the gaps were clear. Old tracks, limited electrification, and inconsistent signaling systems meant that trains couldn't run efficiently. Freight movement was slow, and maintenance costs were high. So, in 2018, the Turkish government launched an ambitious €35 billion national railway upgrade plan. The project had 2 main goals. First, modernize existing lines, replacing old infrastructure, electrifying key routes, and improving safety systems. To build several new high-speed rail routes, connecting major cities, and strengthening Turkey's position as a regional transport hub linking Europe and Asia. This plan wasn't just about trains. It was about national transformation. For a country that sits between continents, railways could mean faster trade, more tourism, and honestly, stronger industrial growth. Naturally, such a massive modernization effort caught the attention of international partners, and none more than China, the global leader in high-speed rail technology. For China, this wasn't just another business deal. It was a strategic opportunity to expand its Belt and Road initiative deeper into Europe. And for Turkey, partnering with China promised exactly what it needed: modern technology experience and financing power to finally bring its rail dreams to life. Everything seemed like a perfect match. But what exactly did China offer, and why did the plan look so promising at first? When China entered the picture, it came prepared, not just with money, but with a full-scale vision. Chinese companies presented a comprehensive cooperation proposal that went far beyond building rail tracks. It was a plan to transform Turkey's entire railway ecosystem, from construction and electrification to digital operation and local manufacturing. First, China offered to fully electrify Turkey's major railway lines, replacing diesel systems with high-efficiency electric trains. This would drastically cut fuel costs and carbon emissions, a big plus for a country aiming to modernize sustainably. Next, The proposal included advanced signaling and communication systems based on digital mobile networks and fifth-generation technology. These systems would allow trains to communicate in real time with control centers, improving both safety and scheduling efficiency. But China didn't stop there. They also proposed using big data analysis and artificial intelligence-based predictive maintenance, meaning trains could detect and fix potential problems before breakdowns happened, the same way China manages its own massive network of trains. One of the biggest highlights was how China addressed Turkey's complex geography. The country's landscape is full of mountains, tunnels, and valleys, challenges that often slow construction. Chinese engineers proposed using shield tunneling technology, a technique already proven in China's mountainous regions, to dig faster and safer tunnels through Turkey's terrain. And perhaps the most strategic part of the plan was the industrial cooperation element. China didn't just want to sell trains, it wanted to build them together with Turkey. Beijing proposed creating joint ventures with Turkish firms, including setting up a local factory in Ankara to produce metro trains right there. Domestically, they even offered to transfer some key technologies like articulated bogie systems, which, allow trains to make much tighter turns, reducing the minimum turning radius from 110 meters to just 30 meters. That's really crucial for cities that have narrow, winding routes. For Turkey, this proposal ticked all the boxes: modern technology, job creation, technology transfer, and a long-term partnership. For China, it was a chance to extend its Belt and Road Railway network deeper into Europe through Turkey, which is, of course, a major strategic bridge between Asia and the West. Both sides were enthusiastic, and negotiations actually went pretty smoothly, at least in the beginning. But then things started to change. Despite all the progress, the partnership suddenly collapsed. So, what exactly went wrong behind the scenes? At first, everything seemed on track. The Chinese side was optimistic. The Turkish government appeared eager. After nearly a year of discussions, both parties were close to signing. But as the talks entered their final stages, hidden tensions surfaced, and they quickly grew into deal breakers. So, Turkey, dealing with some pretty serious domestic political and financial pressures, started making new and, honestly, much tougher demands. They asked China to provide a mixed loan package worth about 8 billion euros, plus another 1.5 billion euros in concessional funding support. Basically, they wanted China to finance most of the project under really favorable terms. But that wasn't all. Turkey also insisted on deep technology transfers, which meant China would have to hand over the core designs, control systems, and the proprietary high-speed rail technologies that had taken it decades to perfect. On top of that, Turkey wanted at least 60% of the materials and components to be produced locally. From Ankara's perspective, these conditions made sense. Turkey didn't just want to build a railway, it wanted to develop its own rail industry, learn from China's experience, and reduce dependence on foreign suppliers in the long run. However, from Beijing's point of view, those demands really crossed into sensitive territory. High-speed rail technology is one of China's most valuable national assets, the result of years of research, investment, and innovation. Handing over that level of intellectual property, especially to a country outside its main industrial ecosystem, was seen as risky. Negotiations dragged on, with neither side willing to budge. China just wasn't comfortable giving away its core technologies, and Turkey refused to scale back its localization requirements. The tension eventually reached a point where cooperation just wasn't possible anymore. After more than 10 rounds of negotiations, the talks quietly collapsed. There was no big announcement, no public fallout, just silence. Soon after, Turkey turned to Germany's Siemens and several European firms, hoping they could deliver what China would not. It was a turning point, a moment that changed the direction of Turkey's railway ambitions. But as we'll see next, that new partnership with Europe didn't turn out the way Ankara expected. After the deal with China fell apart, Turkey didn't waste time. Determined to keep its modernization plans alive, Ankara turned to Germany's Siemens and a group of European partners. From the outside, it seemed like a logical move. Germany had a strong reputation in rail technology, especially with its high-speed ice trains, known for their precision and reliability. At first, the partnership looked promising. The agreement centered on building new high-speed rail lines and upgrading old ones, this time using European railway standards. Siemens promised to deliver modern train control systems based on the European Rail Traffic Management System, or ERTMS, along with improved signaling, power, and communication technologies. But very soon, problems began to appear. The issue wasn't the trains themselves, it was compatibility. Much of Turkey's existing rail infrastructure still carried technical remnants from the Soviet era. Different track gauges, old signaling equipment, and load-bearing bridge standards that didn't match European requirements. These differences created serious conflicts during construction and testing. Then came the localization challenges. Turkey requested that Siemens modify the imported systems to meet local conditions, such as power grid fluctuations and electromagnetic tolerance levels. For example, Turkey's local standards required that trains handle a voltage fluctuation of plus or minus 15%, far beyond the European norm. The result? Siemens's systems failed the electromagnetic compatibility tests required by Turkey's own certification body, the TSSC. This forced the German engineers to redesign and rework major parts of the system, delaying the entire project by 8 months. And as if that wasn't enough, financial troubles soon followed. In 2021, another major project, the Izmir-Manisa Railway Electrification Initiative, faced repeated financing delays. Turkey's state rail authority was struggling to make interim payments due to mounting economic pressure. After several missed deadlines, Siemens suspended construction entirely for 14 months. By now, frustration was growing on both sides. What was supposed to be a smooth European partnership had turned into a maze of technical mismatches, regulatory setbacks, and funding issues. So, with rising costs, mounting debt, and unfinished rail lines, Turkey was once again at a crossroads, and this time, its attention started shifting, back to China. After years of frustration with European contractors, Turkey quietly began rethinking its strategy. By around 2022, whispers started circulating that Ankara was reopening talks with China, this time under very different circumstances. Unlike the earlier negotiations, this new phase of cooperation was built around a broader vision, one that aligned closely with China's Belt and Road Initiative. Rather than focusing only on passenger trains or isolated lines, Turkey now wanted to modernize its entire railway network, integrating it into a larger Eurasian logistics system. At the heart of this plan was one critical goal: comprehensive electrification. Turkey aimed to replace its aging diesel trains with energy-efficient electric systems to reduce carbon emissions and cut long-term operating costs. Among the key targets was the Iran-Turkey railway section, a roughly 1,000-kilometer corridor that plays a major role in trade between Asia and Europe. But the new cooperation wasn't just about upgrading old lines. It also introduced a strategic centerpiece, a project known as the Middle East Corridor, or sometimes the Middle Corridor. This new route would create a high-speed freight connection from Istanbul to the Bulgarian border, designed to link directly with the China-Europe Railway Express, the massive overland cargo network that carries goods between China and Europe. What made this so ambitious was Turkey's intention to adopt Chinese railway standards for the freight system. The idea was to create seamless connectivity, so trains could move from China, through Central Asia and Turkey, all the way into Europe, without the costly technical barriers caused by differing systems or standards. In other words, this wasn't just about faster trains, it was about building a new trade artery across the heart of Eurasia, a route that could bypass traditional paths like the Suez Canal or routes through Russia, offering faster, safer, and cheaper alternatives for global trade. For Turkey, reopening cooperation with China was more than an economic move. It was a geopolitical statement. It signaled that Ankara was ready to rebalance its partnerships, reducing over-reliance on Europe and tapping into Asia's rising influence. But what exactly is this Middle East corridor? And why has it become so important for both Turkey and China? The Middle East corridor, also known as the Middle Corridor, is far more than a railway line. It's a strategic lifeline that could reshape how goods, power, and influence move between Asia and Europe. Let's put it in perspective. Today, about 90% of world trade travels by sea. The most important route is the Suez Canal, which connects Asia to Europe through the Red Sea. But the Suez is crowded, expensive, and vulnerable. As the Ever Given incident in 2021 showed, one blockage can paralyze global supply chains in just a few days. The Middle Corridor offers something radically different, a land-based alternative that runs from China through Central Asia, across the Caspian Sea, into the Caucasus, and through Turkey to Europe. It's not just faster, cutting shipping times by up to 2 weeks, but also safer and less dependent on volatile choke points. For Turkey, this corridor could turn the country into a global logistics powerhouse. Imagine Istanbul not just as a cultural bridge between East and West, but as a freight hub, where goods from Chinese factories pass through Turkish railways before entering the European market. This could boost exports, tourism, and domestic manufacturing, and create tens of thousands of jobs. For China, the corridor is part of its larger Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, strategy, a plan to build infrastructure that connects over 70 countries. But in recent years, China's overland routes through Russia have faced challenges because of Western sanctions linked to the war in Ukraine. That's why the Turkey route, bypassing Russia, has become even more valuable. It ensures China's exports can still reach Europe without political or military risks. At the same time, European nations are paying close attention. While the EU has been cautious about Chinese influence, it also recognizes that this new route could reduce shipping costs and improve energy efficiency and trade. Some EU countries, especially in Eastern and Southern Europe, are already showing quiet support for cooperation with Turkey and China under this new framework. But the biggest shift isn't just economic, it's geopolitical. By deepening ties with China, Turkey is diversifying its alliances. It's no longer placing all its bets on NATO or the EU. Instead, Ankara is positioning itself as a balancer, a bridge that connects Western economies with the rising power of Asia. This balance of power could redefine global trade in the next decade, and as the Middle Corridor takes shape, the next question becomes, can Turkey really handle such a massive project, and what challenges stand in its way? While the Middle East Corridor looks like a dream project on paper, the reality is far more complicated. Building a railway that connects continents isn't just about laying tracks. It's about overcoming politics, money, and geography all at once. Let's start with politics. Turkey sits at the crossroads of many competing powers: the EU, Russia, China, and the United States. Each of them has its own interests in the region. For example, while the European Union wants stronger trade links, it's also wary of China's growing influence through the Belt and Road Initiative. Meanwhile, the United States has warned its allies about becoming too dependent on Chinese infrastructure loans or technology, claiming it could give Beijing too much leverage over critical supply routes. So Turkey must walk a tightrope, trying to cooperate with China without triggering resistance from its Western allies. It's a diplomatic balancing act that requires careful timing and negotiation. Next comes the financial challenge. Railway projects are expensive, especially high-speed or long-distance freight lines. The Middle Corridor would require tens of billions of dollars for tunnels, bridges, modernization, and electrification. While China has offered funding and technology through the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the China Development Bank, some Turkish economists worry this could increase Turkey's external debt. Critics argue that relying too heavily on Chinese financing could lead to debt diplomacy, where Beijing gains long-term influence over key Turkish assets. Similar to what happened in some African and South Asian countries that struggled to repay large loans. Then there are technical challenges. Turkey's existing railway system, though improving, still faces issues like uneven track standards, mountainous terrain, and different electrification systems. Creating a seamless connection with Chinese rail networks means adapting to international gauge standards, improving customs integration, and upgrading freight terminals for faster transfers. And let's not forget the regional risks. The route passes near politically unstable regions, like the Caucasus and parts of Central Asia, where conflicts or sanctions could disrupt traffic. For example, tensions between Azerbaijan and Armenia have occasionally threatened transport routes vital to the corridor. Yet despite all these hurdles, Turkey continues to push forward, because for Ankara, the potential payoff is simply too big to ignore. A successful Middle East corridor could turn Turkey into the main gateway between Asia and Europe, giving it leverage in trade, diplomacy, and energy logistics for decades to come. So, how close is Turkey to actually making this vision a reality? And what progress has been made so far?